One of the favorite arguments creationists have against evolution, to try to demonstrate that nothing meaningful could possibly evolve from a collection of random mutations, is the 1,000 monkeys analogy. This basically states that 1,000 monkeys punching away at the typewriter keys for all eternity would never be able to reproduce the works of Shakespeare. But this analogy shows a fundamental misunderstanding of three basic concepts, and I will discuss these today. This is the Atheism for Beginners channel, and I'm your host, Christian Exenberger. First, we have the concept of eternity, or infinity. Infinity is an idea that the human brain cannot grasp, except perhaps as a mathematical or theoretical construct. I remember my dad trying to explain eternity to me as a child, and he had quite an enlightening description. He explained that if you imagine that once in every 100 years, an eagle flew over Mount Everest and dropped a feather, the amount of time that it would take for the mountain to be reduced to a flat plain by the cumulative erosion of all the feathers would be the equivalent of 1 second of eternity passing. But while this analogy succeeds in painting a picture of a really long time, it still fails to remove the inherent limitation our minds have against imagining something that has no limit. The concept of eternity boils down to the fact that no matter how much time has gone by, there is always more. No matter how massive the odds against something are, something that is possible, given all eternity and an infinite number of tries, you will always get there in the end. Think of the biggest number you can imagine, the biggest probability you can conceive. Now raise that number to the power of itself. We can already see the problem, because the first number was already the biggest you could imagine, the closest approximation your brain can create to the concept of infinity. But now we have made that number larger by your closest perception of infinity orders of magnitude. Why not raise the resulting number to the power of itself again? Are we getting closer to the probability you need yet? If not, let's raise that number to the power of itself again, and keep doing that until the probability is sufficiently high to be likely. Just keep going until you're satisfied. And then we won't even have put a dent in infinity yet, because no matter how large the number, there is always more. With an infinite number of tries and an eternity, no matter how unlikely the probability of something happening is, as long as it is possible, you will always get there. Given enough time, your monkeys are guaranteed to reproduce the works of Shakespeare sooner or later. The second misunderstood concept is the idea that evolution somehow has a target, that there is a predefined objective that it is trying to achieve. But that isn't how evolution works. There is no such thing as the pinnacle of evolution. Evolution is about how well the sum of the mutations you have collected to create you make you fit to live, find a mate, and reproduce in the niche that you inhabit. A housefly is as evolved and tuned to its niche as we are, and that can be said for any species alive today, except perhaps those at risk of extinction. The evolutionary process is probably better described by what the bard went through to create his works himself. Before a story had a concept, there was nothing. Concepts were created, considered, and mostly rejected until the right concept presented itself. Players arose to play a part and were considered, changed and kept or discarded, along with the storyline, plot points, and plot twists. The punctuation and the words themselves were each carefully measured to see if they would fit. Only when he was finished did he know what he had created. It may take your monkey some time to exactly reproduce the works of Shakespeare, but along the way they will have produced innumerable unique works of greater or lesser than quality than those of the bard. The third misunderstood concept is about how evolution works, about the idea that it is simply a collection of random mutations. But that's just half the story, and once you understand the other half, you will realize that there is nothing about the 1,000 monkeys analogy that disproves evolution. The reality is that we haven't had an eternity for evolution to happen. We've only had 3 or 4 billion years, analogous to perhaps a few decades for our monkeys, and not nearly enough time for a purely random process to achieve the desired outcome. But evolution is not a purely random process. I came across some Jehovah's Witness literature depicting 2 flies, one a normal fly and one with stunted wings, apparently the result of a random mutation. The story implied that multiple random mutations cannot produce viable individuals because most mutations are harmful, and that an individual with a bad mutation cannot survive. But this doesn't disprove evolution. In fact, it describes the second part of the mechanism that evolution relies on to work: natural selection. It isn't good news for the individual fly, but it is for the species. Every mutation is tested against life. Every mutation must allow the individual born with it to survive to adulthood, to find a mate and to reproduce for the mutation to be added to the gene pool of the species. In the case of our fly, it will starve because a fly with stunted wings cannot fly to find food. And if it doesn't starve, it will be easy prey for any predator because it cannot escape. And even if it does reach the point where it should reproduce, it is incapable of participating in the mating ritual, even if there was a mate willing to have it. Natural selection, the second part of the evolutionary process, weeds out each mutation that is detrimental to the individual before it can be propagated into the species. And so the stunted wings mutation dies with the fly. Any bad mutation dies with the individual. Only those mutations that are beneficial or neutral will be carried forward. The beneficial ones will eventually become characteristics of every member of the species, because they provide an advantage over those who do not have it. Because it makes them more likely to survive or more likely to attract a mate, or in some other way makes it more likely that they will produce offspring who can carry the mutation forward into the species. Eventually all members of the species will have the mutation. If we take the natural selection process and apply it to our monkeys on typewriters analogy, then it would be like an editor who examines every keystroke made by a monkey and erases it if it doesn't fit with a survival mandate, which, in the case of the analogy, is that it contributes to producing the works of Shakespeare. Suddenly we aren't relying on blind chance anymore. With the addition of selection on the random keystrokes, our random mutation scattergun becomes a guided missile, locked in on the target. If we assume that a monkey hits a correct key 1 time in 100, and the selection process removes the other 99 incorrect keystrokes, then we are guaranteed to create exactly what we have set out to create. The monkeys will produce Shakespeare's work faster than the bard created them himself. Evolution doesn't have a target. It only has a test to see if something works or if it doesn't. What works is kept and what doesn't is rejected. You only need to look at the abundance of life around us to see where that gets you. Thank you for watching, and if you have found something interesting here, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time.